Well, hello, I'm Zippy Duval, and I'm president of American Farm Bureau. And yes, I am the host of the Farmside Chat, and I'm glad to be here with you today. I know that it's uh, spring or early summer when we listen to this podcast, and I hope everybody's enjoying hearing the birds sing and the flowers budding and the grass growing because I got cattle that's been looking for every little sprig of grass that might come up that they have claimed it themselves and trying to run to it to get it before the other cow gets it. So it's just kind of the way it is this time of year. But the hay supplies are getting short, and we need the warm weather and the sunshine and the rain to grow this grass, and everything will be fine. So we'll just turn it over to the Lord and continue to do what we do best. But I have a great guest with me today, one that I actually had the opportunity to introduce to the whole congregation at the National Convention in my annual address, and that's John Dimsmore. He's known as the Green Screen Farmer. Does a great job of telling the farmer's story on social media. And welcome, John.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So, John, if you would tell listeners a little bit about yourself, where you're at, what you do on your farm, and how long you been doing. How'd you get there?
Yeah, no, well, fourth generation lettuce, hay, and grain farmer. The family's been making a go of it here in the Yuma Valley on the border of Mexico and California since about the early 40s. And my wife and I have five wonderful children. We're learning the ropes of parenting teenagers, so it's about as fun as farming sometimes. But I grew up thankfully on the farm and would ride my bike following my dad or my grandpa to the shop or the office all the time. And I knew when I was growing up that I wanted to follow in their footsteps. And something fascinating about farming and being able to see that while we're constantly reminded that we're not in control really of anything that's going on out here, the fact that the good Lord gives us an opportunity to take a stab at things and try to see how we can manage the soils and the moisture and get everything to grow. And it's exciting. I've loved farming since day one.
Yeah, and I happened to go online and look at some of the pictures of you and your family. God, what a beautiful family! You're
Thank you
blessed. You're a blessed man.
very much.
And,
I
yeah,
agree. Thank you.
yeah. So, uh, tell me how. Tell us a little bit about the crops you grow and maybe what a day in your life looks like.
Yeah. So back when my great grandfather started farming, I know there were a lot of seed crops, and the farm has evolved over the years. But the Yuma Valley is known as the winter lettuce capital of the world. And for obvious reasons, we are a very consistent climate, and we're able to grow produce efficiently with minimal inputs through the months of about September. We start planting, and harvest goes from about October and until March, April. And then the rest of the season, we've got our spring and summer hay crops and melons. And a day to day here is really just trying to take every minute of our sunlight that we have and use it as effectively as possible. Because while we're the winter lettuce capital of the world, our other tagline is the sunniest place on earth.
Well, that's got to be a good thing too. I'm one of those guys. If it stays cloudy 3 or 4 days, I'm beginning like, oh goodness, when's the sun going to shine again? We get a lot of rain here in Georgia, but it comes in big clumps, and
Really.
I'm in the hills, kind of, so there's a lot of water that just runs off, never stays in the soil. But of course, I got a lot of grass growing here that uses a lot of it too. But
Yeah.
it would be nice to have a little more sun like y'all do. So,
I
um,
will say shade is a hot commodity, no pun intended. So that's throughout the entire year. So we would welcome an occasional cloud.
yeah. Well, here we don't have to worry about a cloud. We've got plenty of trees here, so that's probably something you don't have much of.
A lot of palm trees, but those suckers don't give too much shade.
That's right. That's right. So you said the lettuce capital of the world.
We're
So
the winter
give
lettuce
us
capital.
give us some idea what percentage of the lettuce that Americans consume. Do you know that on top of your head?
I don't know exactly, but I've seen numbers well into the 90% range of most of the winter vegetables in America come from this region. And that includes Southern California, Imperial Valley, and much of the Yuma Valley. Because again of our consistent weather, we average about 3.25 inches of rain a year, and so that combined with plentiful sun and good resources, we're able to produce as many vegetables as we can pump out of the ground and effectively send across the country. And in our peak months of winter harvest, we see anywhere from 1,200 to 1,500 trucks a day leaving our community with fresh
Wow.
vegetables across the country.
That's amazing. The first time I heard that figure, it kind of blew my mind.
Yeah,
90% of the winter vegetables that Americans eat come from that area of country. Wow, what an important role y'all play in everybody's life. All over the country and a lot of parts of the world, I'm sure too.
absolutely. We're honored.
So we know of you best as the green screen farmer. Tell us first how did you discover the power of social media, and how did you get the name Green Screen Farmer?
I'd be happy to share about that. So, when I was a little kid, I remember getting my first camera, and it had one of those fake flip up viewfinders. And I would take pictures everywhere I went. Just something about it just lit my heart on fire. And one day I was taking pictures of hot air balloons that were over the farm, and I accidentally created a double exposure. And back in the day, kids, when you would take your film to the store to get it developed, you didn't ever know exactly what you were going to get. And when I saw that picture that accidentally happened on that camera, it just lit a fire inside of me. And from then on, I would carry a camera everywhere I went. And once social media started to develop more through Instagram really and Twitter, about 12, 13 years ago, I started uploading photos of the farm and thought maybe some of our friends and family would want to just see what we're doing every day. But it quickly started to grow with people outside of my family and friends that started asking questions, and many people started to ask a lot of questions about how it could be so sunny in the middle of the winter. And it just blew my mind that people asked that. And then I quickly realized we are so blessed down here to be able to farm 365 days a year. So I ran with that. And then fast forward to about 2 years ago on TikTok, when I was sharing videos, standing in front of our lettuce fields, and people said, it's the lines are too perfect, the weather's too perfect to be a December or a January. That's got to be a green screen. And so having good fun with it, a lot of folks played along, and they started calling me the green screen farmer every time I stand in front of our beautiful rows.
Well, I guess a lot of those people didn't understand that you had GPS and those roads are perfect.
That is true. That is true.
And it takes internet and everything else to be able to utilize those technologies, and that's why
It does.
broadband is so important to America. You know.
No, you're absolutely right.
So I've heard you mention TikTok, I heard you mention Instagram, and I've heard you mention Facebook. Tell me which one of those platforms you think grabs the most people's attention, or where do you think you make the most difference in trying to tell our story?
So that's an interesting question because, like many parts of our society, everything comes and goes in waves and trends. Facebook obviously being probably the largest social media platform to really take over society's interest. And then over the years, it kind of evolved into more of, a lot of people would say, oh, that's your parents' or your grandparents' social media platform. Here are all these other ones to try. And I've tried them and was really surprised at some of the connections I was able to grow on TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and Snapchat. But Facebook really still has done a phenomenal job of just getting information out there and helping manage the feeds and being able to just connect with folks. And so really the way I answer that is if you're willing to share on social media, try them and find which one works for you. There is no rhyme or reason really to going viral, if you will, other than what I've learned is sharing who you are. And much of what I learned in my years through serving and volunteering with the Farm Bureau and the Arizona Farm Bureau's effective communication workshops was to share our story. And beyond that, now with social media, we're sharing our story personally. So often on TikTok, I'll tell people, I won't be able to answer on behalf of an entire industry, but I'll tell you here on our family's farm why we farm the way we do and how we use our resources and what we've seen work and what we've seen hasn't quite worked, but it doesn't mean we're not still trying to evolve and learn. And so it's given it's given a new opportunity on these new apps to communicate directly in these live streams. And while that can happen on Facebook, some of the other newer platforms like TikTok and Instagram has definitely catered to that live communication. So again, finding which one works for you is just sharing and talking about who you are and what your story is.
So we've heard a lot of discussion about TikTok in the news. So what's the green screen farmer think about TikTok, and do you have fears around it?
No fears. The way I see it is everything comes and goes in life, and really it's the true story of every farmer and rancher I've ever met. We overcome and we learn whatever's out there, and we grow from there. And so, if for any reason TikTok is taken out of our option for social media, there will continue to be new options as well as the ones that we've currently had. Again, Facebook and Instagram have done a pretty good job of growing how they allow the feeds to spread information. And I understand as well that there's a lot of control on those social media platforms that can definitely kind of leave a bad taste in our mouths sometimes. And so thankfully, it seems that the powers that be are working continuously to find better forms of social media for us to be able to use. So no, not really too worried about that. We still have YouTube and the other platforms available, and I'm sure something new will come out and we'll all be running over there to learn how to use it as well.
So I heard you mention too, you basically have conversation with people over social media. Do you see more negative comments or more positive comments? And if they are negative, how do you utilize that, or do you confront them? Do you
Yeah,
tell me how you manage through that?
I love that question. So through Instagram, 12, 13 years, pretty good engagement, but for the most part, pictures of farming rarely brought up any negativity. Once I started sharing more in the videography side or the videos on TikTok or even Instagram stories, that started to create more of an engagement and discussion. And in the beginning, on occasion, I would get negative comments, but as videos started to blow up and go viral, I shared the very first video that went viral for me on TikTok was a farm implement that we use regularly, and I quickly learned the rest of the country does not. And most of the folks were inquisitive and curious of it, and there were some that had negative comments, and I felt the need to respond to everybody and explain. And one of the benefits that I truly stand beside with social media is it gives us a lot of opportunity to be slow to speak, quick to listen, and honestly address those that we deem worthy of our response. And that's not to sound high and mighty. It just means, as we know, there's a lot of folks out there that really sometimes just seek the thrill of negative engagement, and those are the ones that are most easy to block or ignore. And so I've got very comfortable with the block button or the mute button if I'm doing a live and in a walk in a field and somebody comes in, or a few, and they want to just create controversy or argument for argument's sake, then I'll just mute them or block them. And so to answer your question, thankfully, far more positive engagement than I ever see negative. But the few negative that do come, I see it as an opportunity to be slow to speak and quick to listen, and respond when I see fit.
I was head of a school board one time, and we had a principal that was so slow to speak. A lot of times you'd have to go, "Did you hear my question?" But I've learned so much from him, because a lot of the conversations he and I had were difficult conversations, and he would be like staring at you and thinking, so he could make sure he worded his answer in a way that was effective
Yeah,
and polite and courteous, and you know
yeah,
so I learned so much from him. So I really believe in that statement. Yeah, I
yeah.
really do. I think if more of us exercise that, there'd be a lot less conflict in the world.
One of the benefits that I've learned with social media is having people stand up for the discussion and be able to really kind of self-regulate. And it's been nice because seeing the negative comments can sometimes be hurtful, but there's so much positivity and so many people that aren't in farming or ranching but truly want to know a farmer or a rancher and want to know the stories of the family. And why the farm does what it does. And a lot of folks will say, hey, y'all need to keep it down over there trying to stir trouble. We actually want to hear this. And so my time seeing videos blow up has really been fun because I've gained a connection with a lot of people that in the beginning may not have agreed with our style of farming. Or maybe, as I've said before, um, maybe we wouldn't have connected, say, outside of the internet, but that gives that opportunity of somebody to be able to just stumble upon your content and say, well, I'm a little curious. What's their story?
So, I heard you mention one of the posts went pretty viral, and it was a piece of machinery you thought everybody knew about. That I don't think I knew about. Was it the one that turned and opened up the irrigation canals in Point Road?
It
I
did,
mean,
yeah.
that was pretty amazing. I had never seen that machine work. So what do you call that
Yeah.
machine?
We call it La Palita, is what we've nicknamed the little shovel,
Little
because
shovel.
while it's technically multiple shovels on one implement, it has saved us the need of having a crew of, say, 6 to 8 people out in a field for 8 to 10 hours trying to clean the furrows out to allow water to get to the ends. And this implement can cruise, and this implement can get probably about 20 acres in the span of, you know, 30 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a pretty amazing piece of machinery. And it's amazing as long as I've been around agriculture, and I've been to every state in Puerto Rico seeing agriculture, I still see and hear things that I haven't seen or heard before. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I was on a farm in Alabama last week, and the farmers, we were standing there talking about issues and farm bill and waters of the U.S. and everything. And his daddy was with us and sitting in the chair there, and his daddy was 96, and they always just capture my heart because that's a different generation. And sometimes I look at what they did and what we do. They were a lot tougher than we are. And we're pretty
Amen.
darn tough, but they were a lot tougher than we are. And so I asked him, I said, so when you started farming, how big was this farm? Because they was farming about 3,500 acres. And he says it was a 3 horse farm. And I says, that's a phrase I've never heard of. And in the state next to my state, Alabama and Georgia, I would have thought that through my grandparents and my families, I would have heard that. And I don't know that I know that comment. Explain to me what a 3 horse farm is. And he said, well, a horse can work about 20 acres. So I had about 60 acres.
Wow.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah,
That was
never heard
pretty
that.
cool. And so I told him, I said, you can expect me to repeat that. So everybody's heard it now. A 3 horse
Yeah, there you
farm
go.
with like 20 acres per horse. So talking about that, how many acres do you farm, and where is your market carrying your lettuce?
Yeah, so we're hovering around that 1,500 acre mark. Comes and goes, if you will. A lot of times in the summer, we'll pick up some ground along the border wall and grow quite a bit of hay on that sandier ground. Most of the winter lettuce is contracted with a shipper that will send it all across the country. And then another company we use to grow a lot of small leaf items like spinaches and parsleys and cilantros and all the really good smelling stuff will get bundled up and sent sometimes into restaurants directly or into the big box, grocery stores across the country as well.
So a lot of my listeners aren't farmers. So tell them, do you sell direct to restaurants, or do you just sell everything through that broker?
Not yet. An idea that we've talked about often here. We would like to be able to really establish a strong connection in our community. Having said that, similar to our hay, it's often more financially effective and just energy effective for us to load hay straight onto a semi truck and send it, across the state or to a neighboring state. Same with the vegetable production. There's a lot on the line, and a lot of these companies have built themselves up to a point to be able to effectively get that sent and marketed to the right places. And it's a big undertaking for somebody who's maybe not fully established in being able to do that like ourselves. So we definitely take advantage of those connections.
I think a lot of our friends that don't understand agriculture marketing wonder why more of us don't sell directly to them as consumers. And one of the good example I think of here, there were a lot of little dairies here, and a lot of those little dairies tried to start processing their own milk and marketing it in under their farm label. and they loved it. They loved it, but there wasn't enough of you to get it all done. And they loved milking cows. They loved growing the feed from them. They loved taking care of them, and they didn't mind the processing. But then when they had to put it on the truck and start peddling that stuff, and then you had to compete with the big co-ops where they push you out of the good space, and it just absolutely worn them out until they just couldn't stand it no more. And most of them ended up going out of business because of it. So it's not as easy as it sounds when
No.
someone asks you that question.
Yeah. Well,
It's quite.
and a question we get often is for folks that have never seen a head lettuce iceberg field be harvested or romaine. Often there's a lot of leaves left behind, far less than what the field looked like prior to harvest. And for us who've seen it and grown up with it, we look at that as, man, that's good micronutrients we're going to incorporate back into the soil if we run a disc over it or a plow. But a lot of folks will say, gosh, you can't take those leaves and go feed people with it, or say, glean and run over to the mission or the food bank, and we do often, but uh, there's so much involved with doing that. We've got heavy priority on food safety on our end, so to have anybody be able to go into a field and harvest anything for raw edible consumption, you've got to be trained and certified, and liability for safety coverage, making sure somebody with a lettuce knife knows how to use it effectively. And there's just so much involved with it that it's often more efficient for us to be able to turn it right back over into the soil and benefit from that.
I think that's an unbelievably good point. That people that are not close to agriculture have no idea all the regulation we're under, and we're not saying all of them are bad. But we'll tell you they're burdensome.
Yeah,
But if they make sense and they're supported by science and they're protecting people, hey, we're all for it.
yeah.
But don't ask us to do silly, foolish things that really's not going to make a difference. And when I was in the dairy business, we were asked to do a lot of that. Well, there's one spider web in the corner. We're going to take your permit for 3 days until you get that spider web down. That's just a little ridiculous, and it's happened. It's happened.
Well,
So
I go ahead.
so talking about challenges, on your farm? What's the biggest challenge you face?
Gosh, right now I would say our biggest concerns are our natural resources like our Colorado River irrigation water. The drought is affecting many of us in the country, and right now we have been thrilled to see the snowpack up north of us and quite a bit of rain. And I've been studying the forecast models, looking at here middle of March, the West Coast should be getting a pretty good um, bucket of moisture coming in, so we're praying for that as well. Outside of those things, a lot of it really does come down to being able to effectively manage our food safety guidelines that we follow during our vegetable production. That is a big part of our daily life. For example, um, any overhead irrigation water, 21 days to harvest, needs to be sanitized. So that includes any dust abatement or water trucks that are used to keep the dust down on roads. If it's next to a crop that will be harvested within 3 weeks, it's got to be sanitized, whether it be using a certain small amount of chlorine or oxidate. And so we have to regulate how much we're applying, and we have to test that water to prove. So just yesterday, I took my little 100 milliliter bottles of water out to a few of our irrigation sources, as well as our water truck, tested the water to make sure that we are, in fact, sanitizing it effectively. And then I run those samples up to the lab. And so hopefully sometime this morning, I'll get those results and be green light to keep on moving. And if we don't have a number that's within the threshold, then I'll go back and test again. And those are just some of the examples of what we do on a regular basis to make sure that we're really establishing a safest growing environment we possibly can in the outside environment.
My neighbor grows a lot of great vegetables in his garden. I don't anymore because I don't have time between this job and my farm itself. But we don't even have, no one in their garden has that safety and that to the
Yeah,
extreme that you do. And I just think that goes to speak to the security and the safety of our abundant food supply across the country. And it's
absolutely.
due to sensible science-based regulations, but it's also due to a lot of hard work farmers do. Farmers got to be engineers, mechanics, scientists, dads and husbands
Weathermen.
and wives, weathermen. We are a jack of all trade. I tell everybody I'm a jack of all trade, not good at much of anything.
There you go. And some of the benefits, though, of good change, I would say the amount of labor that's involved in our vegetable industry down here in the winter months is so high. I mean, how many hands are down here? So some of the benefits, I would say, is the necessity to have additional restrooms out by the fields, your porta
Mm-hmm.
potties. That's
Yeah.
something that I look back and go, gosh, I can't believe, it took to which year that was, 2006, 2007, to require that. And so
Right.
being able to drive around the valley and constantly see those available is a good thing, because none of us wants to have to fight the elements if something is required there. And so being able to have that, and just to continue to show, one, our employees that we truly care about your well-being, and two, we want to, we're the consumer as well. We want those that are in the grocery stores to know not only do we care about the employees and the process of growing those vegetables, but we really care about the safety of it.
So there's a lot of discussion around um, farm labor and heat stress and working patterns. Tell me
Mm-hmm.
what you think about all that discussion, because I know we're getting closer and closer to having some kind of regulation around that. How do you feel about that?
Having grown up learning a lot of those ropes, and really understanding that, especially in the summer heat down here, it gets terribly hot and it gets dangerous. And so I am absolutely certain that most of the farms, well, every farm that I can look around at our neighbors, I know provides the shades and provides water and will manage the hours effectively, especially in the hot summer months where we're not in the vegetable season. So that priority to have long days is not as high. So many times we'll just manage the hours and say, hey, let's come in bright and early and let's clock out here early afternoon. Or if it's a heat advisory, we may send the guys home and just say, you are far more important than this work we've got out here today. So any regulation that comes in can always provide hurdles that might make it a little extra difficult, but I want to believe that there's a positive intent behind most of it. However, anytime the industry can beat the government to regulating, for example, the leafy greens marketing agreement, when our ag industry, California and Arizona, effectively created a set of guidelines to prove and provide safe food, safe vegetables, the government then years later said, hey, we'd like to borrow some of those um, guidelines that you've created and some of your data, and then we'll create the Food Safety Modernization Act. So being able to have that as an example to show you that the industry, one, cares, and two, is really good at what we do. The same would go for labor and caring about the employees. Unfortunately, there are some businesses out there that have done a pretty tough job on food safety or caring for their employees, which is why we see those regulations coming in.
Yeah. Well, but that's a great example of local government is the best government, because you know we have a lot of times on the federal level, because I deal with those advocating for farmers on the federal level. We there's something policy or some bill passed, and it sounds good, but it might be only good for southeast farming, or it might be
Mm-hmm.
good just for your area. One size fit all hardly ever fits all of
Yeah,
agriculture,
very
and
true.
there needs to be, always needs to be, that flexibility to be adjusted by regions of the country and the different farming practices. But that is very hard to do. It's hard to get done.
That's been
Uh,
part of our H2A discussion,
yeah,
especially when you're farming or ranching on the border at a port of entry and you've got to provide housing. That's not the problem. Most farmers and ranchers will say, hey, if I'm signing up for it, I'm going to follow the rules and I'm going to take care of these employees. But sometimes you get H2A labor that says, I'd like to just go back across every night.
right.
Well, by federal law, we've got to have that housing over here, not ourselves, but others that have participated. And they'll say sometimes it sits vacant throughout the season because we've got to have it. But we're right on the border of entry, or the border where the folks just go right back and legally every day commute back and forth because they would prefer to. But because it's a set standard, they've got to have it there.
Isn't that so silly? Now that doesn't make sense. That's where common sense ought to overrule
Yeah.
overrule the regulation. So you talk about that workforce and people coming back and forth in that port of entry. Give our listeners some idea how big that is and how valuable it is for us to be able to have that labor and get the leafy greens to all of Americans.
Yeah, during the peak months of our winter vegetable production, there's anywhere from 20 to 30,000 people crossing
Wow.
one port of entry down here in San Luis, Mexico, San Luis, Arizona. And that's daily, and that's what I'm excited to hear that the board will be able to see and witness. There's just something phenomenal to see folks coming across legally, documented, able to work. We need skilled labor, but we need to do it the right way, and that's what's happening. And to see so many people that, one, want to be able to do that job, and two, the companies that are waiting there with buses, and then these folks go out, and I mean, to see them all across the county, far and wide, whether it be weeding a field or thinning a field or planting or harvesting, to see how many hands are involved with that just goes to show how much we care, we the collective industry, about being able to provide safe vegetables and inexpensive vegetables for the country.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of passionate people around the issues around border entries and people that's just coming over and undocumented. And, people get real emotional about that.
Mm-hmm.
But if they just understood, especially the people that are crossing to work in that area and how important it is. You're talking about naked grocery store shelves. Now, that leafy
Yeah.
green would be gone if it wasn't for those people
Well,
that
and that's
leave
one
their
of my
home in
goals.
another country, come here to pick it, and go back home to their house in the afternoon. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. No, you're right. There's a phrase I've heard often: you either import your labor or import your food. And
exactly.
sometimes there's it's a difficult decision, but that's been one of my goals with the social media, is that if I can share our personal story, at least some of what happens here in our community and what it takes to make this industry thrive in the winter months, often I will get comments and messages from people that say, my grandfather used to do that in the fields, and now I'm so proud of him because my parents went on and did something, and now here's this person saying, and I've graduated with a master's degree and I'm teaching, or folks that say I've joined the military, and while we're witnessing this separation be created, while for generations of families would work in the fields, now you see a lot of field workers that'll show you pictures of their family and say, look, he's in the military, or she's in the military, or he's gone off to do this, and they're so proud. And so it's neat to be able to see that, but also trying to share that story and that image. And more than half of our employees on our small farm commute back and forth every day, and I have tried to slowly share that story a little bit. And I have to be sensitive on how I communicate it and what verbiage I use, because unfortunately there's a lot of people that assume one thing. And so just trying to share that story about the skilled legal workforce, that because we live on the border, they're able to go back and forth because often their families can't come over, or they live with their parents and have said, I'm not gonna do my paperwork, and so they'll say, okay, I'll go back. And just trying to share that story has brought me a lot of joy, because I've had a lot of good discussions with people that have come out of their comfort zone as well, and say, I never considered this and I didn't realize that, and happy to see that.
People need to understand that, because the ones that truly come here in mind to contribute to our society and our communities and work like we all do on our farms, they contribute hugely to all Americans across this country, and people need to understand that. It's important.
Absolutely.
So, to go back to social media just a little bit, I'm a little older than you, quite a bit older than you, and I don't know of anybody in my community that really does social media from the farm. A lot of them, when I'm on my farm working on the weekends when I come home, it's like my mind just is not there. It's not thinking about, wow, that's a cool picture, I need to take a picture of that or do a short video, because it's so focused on what I'm doing. Talk about the time it takes you to do that, and what makes something go off in your head and say, this is it, I got to tell this.
Non-farm first, my daughter, my little girl, was laughing at me the other night. We were on our way home after work. I picked her up from gymnastics, and it was one of those rare cloudy evenings where the sun had just dropped below it and the sky was bright gold. And in the median of our street was this shopping cart stuck in the gravel. And I looked at her and I said, you know how beautiful of a picture that would be, the sun shining off of it. It's just strange that there's a shopping cart there in the middle of the road. And she started looking at it and said, I think I see it. Now, she was probably just being nice to me. But it's that kind of idea that will sometimes cross my head. So what I love about it is that everybody sees it different. Kind of like scripture. Sometimes you're reading something and it just hits you a little different than everybody else. And so I will often take my camera phone and if I leave my fancy camera in my truck, and I'll just snap away because something speaks to me about it. And one thing that I've learned regarding how much time I have put into it, some videos on TikTok where I have duplicated myself and I've created this character called the backseat farmer. I know it sounds a little silly, but often there are keyboard warriors on our social media platforms that always know better than us, right? Always know how to farm better and do better. And so I've created this character to kind of allow myself to be sarcastic and be that. And those require some time because I'm editing. But a lot of times my photos that I shoot from the hip, that I really just pull the camera out, my phone, and just snap away, I'll sometimes throw one up there and go, I didn't edit it, or I didn't put a ton of thought into it. And often those are the ones that speak to people and say, gosh, that makes me think of growing up on my dad's farm or my uncle or my aunt. And those are the moments that I feel fulfilled, because if I can provide any opportunity for people to catch their breath during the day or night and maybe just check out for a moment, all the stresses aside, everything going on, and just say, gosh, you know what, that's a beautiful sunset. Or look at a field and say, I didn't know that spinach could grow in January and in the U.S. And so it's been a good opportunity to see that you could put hours in or you could put seconds in. And literally, the way I say to people that are even the slightest bit interested in starting, I say, take a picture of something that you like, put it up there. You don't even have to put up a caption, hashtags, none of that. People will see it and it'll speak to somebody. And even if it's one person that sees it and goes, gosh, that just gave me a moment of peace, you can't ask for anything better than that.
Yeah. So, John, I've enjoyed our conversation just wonderfully today, and I'd like for you to take the next few minutes to kind of sum it up, what you'd like to say, and make sure you tell everybody how they can find the Green Screen Farmer and participate with you.
Well, thank you. Across most platforms, my name is The Farmer John, Jon, and the message that I would say to leave people with is, don't be afraid to share your story with those that may not look like you or vote like you or worship like you, farm like you. Often those that we assume don't want to hear our stories are the ones that actually want to hear it the most. And the discussions that I've been able to have throughout the last few years on social media, because of the stories I've shared and my family and our farm, they have just brought me so much joy. There's been far more positive engagement than negative. And I encourage anybody that's interested in sharing their story to just do it. To just get out there, share some pictures of what they love to do. And even if they go, gosh, I see this every day, it can't be that fascinating to people. I bet you there's people like me that'll look at it and go, I didn't know that you could do that. So Get out there and give it a shot.
Well, you just heard it from the Green Screen Farmer that, using social media sends mustard seeds all over this community that may generate someone to be interested in what we do and understand us a little bit better. Because truly, there's always a bad apple in every bunch, but truly, 99.9% of the farmers are out there to do the best they can do for the people that's going to consume their product, best they can do to take care of their animals, best thing they can do to take care of their natural resources and their family. Because I know you're like me, every inch of my farm is my home. Absolutely. And I would do nothing to hurt my home. So thank you for being with me today. Look forward to seeing you real soon. And we hope everybody enjoyed our conversation with the Green Screen Farmer. And we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Farmside Chat. Thank you, and God bless you. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Farmside Chat. Please be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, take a minute to rate and review the podcast. This helps us continue to bring you farm fresh content that everyone can enjoy. Until next time, thank you
and God bless you.